Time and welcome to Middlesex University Childhood and Society SIG. We have the difficult dialogue strand today with our very own Dr. Mona Sark, who will present the baby room as a contested site in early childhood education and care. So I'm not going to spend much time, please, describing or informing anybody. It's our last session of the SIG for this year. Mona's going to kick straight off and tell us what she's got planned for us on this exciting 1 hour journey. But please do use the chat freely for reflections and points so we can kind of, I'll monitor that as we're going along. You're all very welcome in this safe space and collegial networking space. So, Mona, over to you.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Angela. And also thank you so much, everybody, for giving up the time to be here, because especially when we've actually got some summertime weather, it's quite hard to drag yourself into a computer, sit down and then join in with a session like this. So I'm really, really grateful and pleased that you're here. Bear with me. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Although I'm not going to actually be doing very much talking at you and not very much traditional presenting, I want to do things a little bit differently today and actually host this as a bit of a discussion about the baby room. And when I'm talking about the baby room, I'm talking about that kind of traditional unit within a nursery, in English nurseries, in UK nurseries, often called the baby room, where typically you get babies from kind of 3 months up to 2 years. Settings are sometimes different in how they talk about it and in their ages, but that's kind of quite a typical situation that we have. Now, what I want to do today is spend a little bit of time giving you some context about the baby room, and in particular, some of the work that we're doing at Middlesex University that relates to the baby room as it is now and the future of the baby room, which, given kind of plans and the implementation of plans regarding the expansion of subsidised funding within English nurseries at the moment, has kind of a massive impact on the baby room, right? For the first time ever, we're talking about subsidised places for 9-month-olds. And so suddenly baby rooms are having to expand massively. And that gives us a great chance to sit back and think, what is the baby room for? What is the baby room about? So I'm going to give a bit of that context to begin with. And then within that, I want to offer up some provocations around the baby room, provocations for us to then dialogue around. So rather than me saying, I think this about the babies in the baby room, or I think this about baby room educators, I'm going to ask some questions about what makes a baby room. And I'm going to offer up some kind of provocative quotes that I've gathered through my research. And then I'd really love to just stop sharing my screen and open the floor to a bigger discussion. So the balance for this session is going to be slightly different to what we traditionally do, which is more like, somebody speaking for 30, 40 minutes, and then we have some questions at the end. I'm going to really try and restrict myself, difficult, but keep my own talking to kind of, 10, 15 minutes, and then actually open the floor and we can hopefully have a really rich dialogue together. So in those provocations, I'm going to break it down to how we think about babies, how we think about baby room educators, and how we think about the baby room as a place, as an institution, as a kind of social unit. And then in our dialogues together, I think there's a chance here for us to talk about what's happening at the moment, so how we perceive what's going on in the baby room at the moment. But also, I think the most exciting thing to do is to launch off from that, to ask, what's the future of the baby room? What future do we envision? What future do we hope for? And what needs to happen to make this vision a reality? Okay. All right. So just a little bit of context before I jump into the provocations. So at Middlesex University, we've got this growing focus on the baby room. We've got people that research and write about the baby room. I'm excited because Dilys is here, and I learned a lot of my kind of passion about babies and thinking about babies from Dilys and conversations with Dilys. So it's wonderful to have you here, Dilys, and I'm excited to hear what you have to share in the dialogue. Jane Osgood as well has done lots of work thinking about experiences in the baby room, experiences with babies, and that's been a helpful jumping off point as well. I've just signed a contract with Bloomsbury for a book called The Baby Room as a Contested Site in Early Childhood Education and Care that's going to try and look at the baby room through different angles, sociological, philosophical, psychological, and so on. Okay, so we've got this kind of hub of research and writing about the baby room. We also, a few years ago, we got a little bit of funding from BELMAS, from the British Education, Leadership, Management, Administration Society, to set up a training platform that continues to exist. And at some point, I'll put into the chat the hyperlink for that, but called Baby Rooms Inspiring Leaders. It's a place where baby room leaders can find resources and training that is specific to the baby room. Because the thing that we hear from the sector so often is that people that work in baby rooms are having to adapt things that are actually intended for people working with toddlers or working with preschoolers. Very little focuses specifically on the experiences of the baby room. We also, and I think I can just about make this public, we've received a big grant from Nuffield Foundation to launch a project on advancing high quality provision in the baby room. The first question of that project is going to be, what does it mean? What does quality look like? What is high quality provision in the baby room? And trying to gather lots of different perspectives on that, as well as thinking about what baby room educators need in order to be able to offer the interactions that constitute high quality provision. And of course, the baby room is a really important focus in all the teaching that we do. So just one example, that on the BA Early Childhood Studies program that we run, which has a compulsory kind of placement, and we work towards the graduate practitioner competencies, babies and experiences with babies are a big part of that. And that's something that we're really attuned to and kind of looking to grow. And there's also, you know, the possibility for maybe bringing in some teaching offers that are more specifically focused on the baby room. Okay, so that's just a bit of context around, you know, the baby room as a site of activity here at Middlesex University and with all of our partners as well, of course. Now, let's get into the kind of juicy bit of this. I want to, as I said, kind of offer up some questions, some provocations, so that we can kind of get under the skin of the baby room and really ask what's going on there and what would we like to go on there. So the first kind of pit stop that I want to make in that journey is to actually think about how we think about the babies that are in the baby room. How do we construct the babies that are in the baby room? What are the narratives? What are the discourses that surround the babies in the baby room? Okay. And then within that, what does it mean to care for and educate babies? And I think this gets us back into that kind of perennial debate of care and education, care and education. How do those two things go hand in hand when we're thinking about babies? And I think certainly I've come across in my research a bit of a block in thinking about education for babies. I purposefully talk about baby room educators rather than baby room practitioners, but I notice people kind of flinching when I say baby room educators, and I think that's really interesting to unpick and stay with. So what does it mean to care for a baby in the baby room? What does that look like? And what does it mean to educate a baby in the baby room? What does that look like? And then going forward, how do we want to actually think about the babies in the baby room? What do we want to celebrate and appreciate about babies? What do we want to focus on? And what do we want to highlight? So in kind of constructing the beneficiary of the baby room, the baby, what do we really want to home in on? What is the vision of the baby in the baby room? Now, just to kind of problematize and provoke a little bit more, I want to offer up just a few quotes from baby room educators, wonderful baby room educators that I've had the chance to interview. And I'm going to share some quotes that for me are problematic, that raise questions. But what I don't want to suggest is somehow that these educators are not doing a great job because they share these thoughts about the babies. In fact, I think they're just surfacing thoughts that we all maybe have and that we all maybe need to unpick. You'll see what I mean when I share the quotes. So let me go ahead and share. Okay, so here are 3 quotes from baby room educators that I think are a really interesting starting point for us to have this discussion about, how do we think about babies in the baby room? So Edith says, they need you because most of them can't do anything for a few months. They can just barely sit and have a lot of needs. Brianna says they go from doing nothing, can't talk, can't walk, can't even eat, to being almost, I was going to say like a human being, but they are already, but like a proper human being. Okay. They learn from us, they copy us, they suck everything from us. So I feel if we provide love and care for those children, that's the most important thing at that stage in life. Okay, I'm not going to offer up too much commentary around these quotes, other than to say they make me think a lot. And I hope that they kind of get you thinking a lot. I particularly love this. I was going to say they're like a human being, but of course they are already, but now they're going to be like a proper human being. I think that raises some really important questions for us in how we construct babies in the baby room, but as a reflection of how we construct babyhood, maybe widely and more widely in society. Okay, the next thing I want to raise provocations around is how we think about people that work in the baby room, who I refer to as baby room educators. But that in itself, I think, is an interesting conversation for us to have. What do we call the people that work in the baby room? What do you think they should be called? Lourdes, you run a nursery. I'd be really interested to hear, what do you call the people that work in your baby room and why? And I'm interested in this language because I think it's really important for us to think about how baby room educators are seen at the moment, how they see themselves, and kind of very closely intertwined with that, what training and support are they benefiting from? Where are their lacks? And I would suggest that the lacks are huge, and there's much more of an absence than a presence of the support that they require. And going forward, what is it that we want for baby room educators in terms of status, in terms of recognition, in terms of reward, and in terms of development? Now, I know that the picture is not rosy in early childhood education and care generally. So we could have a hot, massive conversation, a day-long conference about early childhood educators and what we want for them. But I specifically want us to think about baby room educators within that, because so often what they describe is basically being the lowest of the low. The early childhood education within the education system is at the bottom. And then actually within that nursery context, the baby room is seen as being at the bottom of that. I'm not saying that that's the reality, but that's what they feel. Often feel that they're having to explain, and I've heard this experience quite a lot, that they're having to explain what they're doing to their manager, that they're having to explain that what they're doing is worthwhile, that they're having to manage up because there is little understanding about really what's going on in the baby room. A quote from Paula, just to get us kind of thinking about that. I think we have quite a big impact, to be fair. We are the starting point for the babies as they grow older. So we're getting that foundation for them to achieve the goals they need for the next rooms. But that's why the baby room is undervalued for what we actually do, because people just think, oh, you just sit with babies, you just feed them and that's it. We are the foundation for the babies. We build them for you for the next room. Now, there's some beautiful literature around baby pedagogies. So I'm thinking about Shin and Rechia and their kind of pedagogies of care, which really kind of look at and celebrate what is it that baby room educators or baby pedagogues, whatever you want to call them, are doing. What is it that they're actually doing? So it might look to somebody else like just sitting with the babies, but what you're actually doing is far more than that. However, while there's some beautiful literature around that, still, when we talk to people in practice, there is a gap between what that literature is sharing about the richness of what's going on within the pedagogy and what people are experiencing day to day, what they're feeling valued for day to day. I've not come across yet many baby room educators that feel genuinely valued. I can think about a couple of settings where actually, interestingly, the manager was first based in the baby room, so has huge experiences with babies, and then that trickles down into how they then see what's happening in the baby room now. But actually, for the most part, people that work in the baby room, the first thing that they'll say when they come on to like a workshop with me, and I ask them, what's the worst thing about the job that you do? For most of them, they'll say, people don't get it. People don't value what I do. People don't understand. My manager doesn't understand. The parents don't understand. So this feeling of not being valued, not being seen, not being heard, I think is something we really need to tackle. So I'll offer that up as a provocation. And then finally, this is the bit I'm kind of most curious about almost, the baby room as a social unit. And here I'm really thinking, like, how do we see the baby room in relation to society? How do we see the baby room in relation to what we hope for children and families? And I've always been really surprised at how apologetic many baby room educators are about working in a baby room. They're doing an amazing job, right? And they're doing it on very little pay and in very difficult conditions. So you'd expect them to kind of know that. But actually, there's often, not always, but often a sense that somehow in an ideal world, there wouldn't be a baby room. In an ideal world, that baby would be with their primary caregivers. And this is why I've got this question. Is the baby room seen as plan A or plan B or maybe even plan C in terms of what we hope for babies in our society? It feels to me like very few people are celebrating the baby room as this wonderful and exciting opportunity for babies. And instead, it's being positioned as ideally the baby will be at home, but they can't be at home because the parents have to work. And therefore, they're coming into the baby room. So we've got to try being home from home. That's a phrase that just comes up time and time again. We need to be home from home. Why? Why is the baby room not more than the home? You know, why is it not different from the home? Can we not celebrate that difference? So my provocation here is, do we have a vision of what the baby room might be that other alternatives in care and education are not? You know, can it be something distinct? Can it be something special? Can we celebrate it on its own terms? And here, perhaps we can look to other countries as well to get inspiration in terms of what they do and how they see the baby room. So the big question there is, you know, what does the baby room of the future look like? And I've just got one quote to kind of bring that to life. So I think what we do is so important to children. I know there's such a taboo about children going to nursery and the baby room. And when the baby room educator said this to me and said there was such a taboo, I was like, is there? I genuinely hadn't realized that it was felt to this extent. And I think it's really interesting to unpick this. Such a taboo about children going to nursery in the baby room, but it helps them so much with their communication skills. I think for parents as well, not just for children, we're a massive support. For parents coming out of COVID, it makes a difference to have people to lean on. So I think childcare is a massive thing, and it does change the world because you're shaping the future. You can tell that I asked Francesca whether she felt that her work was changing the world for the better. And she gets there. She gets to the point where she believes that it is. But at the same time, there's this massive hurdle of a perceived taboo around babies going into the baby room. And so I want to unpick that together as well and think about whether that has a place in the future of the baby room. Okay, so With that, I'd like to open up the discussion now, and just maybe Angela and I together can share in a very informal way a discussion about the baby room. And there's no real format for this. You don't need to stick to the questions that I've asked. You can share what you like. But some questions that we might want to use and kind of keep on coming back to. So the first is, how do we perceive the current realities of the baby room? And within that, how the babies are seen, how the baby room educators are treated and perceived, and how we as a society are seeing the baby room, how we're looking at the baby room and constructing it. And then maybe we can jump off from there to thinking about the future of the baby room. What do we envision for the future of the baby room? And what needs to happen to make this vision a reality? But really important to stress, we don't need to hit these one by one. I think what would be lovely, and I know that there's lots of people in the room that feel passionately about this, is just to field the comments and the questions as we go. Angela, if it's okay, I think it would be lovely to do this as a discussion, so it doesn't need to keep on coming back to me to answer things, but instead, in fact, we can all be answering each other.
That sounds great, and I don't mind just keeping an eye on whose hands up to jump in.
Fantastic.
And Mona, again, so provocative. You really touched upon, I know there's going to be a fire of responses and engagement from everybody, because you made me think of, I started off working with babies 35 years ago, and it was as if you took me through a Doctor Who time chalice, and I was hearing what I heard then. So but you know, with a new voice, so it was powerful. I know that Jane was she put on the comments that she was quite shocked at how terrifying some of the quotes were. They've been quite provocative. Lisa agreed. And then Lisa also said about the school readiness arguments. I'm sure these people will come up and feedback to us about their strong reactions. So I think we'll kick off with Lourdes, her hands up, and over to you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm very excited. Love this topic. Thank you, Mona. You just said a couple of things that I would like to highlight, like the manager experience is very important, I think. We had the discussion at the supervisor network launch, and funnily enough, we were saying that if you had the opportunity to be in a baby room after you've had information about the importance of early childhood, you can transfer and model that to the newcomers and to the early years sector. I think empowering the staff is really important. I used to call them, and I love the fact that you pointed out, because if you just call them, you're in the baby room, you can see their faces drop. But if you say, you reiterate the importance, I never call them the baby room staff, but I say you're the brain architects. And I think that's really important when they start seeing, and you explain why, you give them an overview of the importance of those 1001 days and how that's going to shape, how that's going to be the foundation. I think that information provides the opportunity for them to empower themselves. And I always say, whatever you learn, whatever you see, you can share that with the parents. The parents also need to have that information, because it is a taboo. They think they just come and do nothing. And the misconception that the children are passive, they come as a passive being, and they are becoming, where if you explain, or not explain, but if you give them the opportunity to acquire the information that from the moment of conception, we are already evolving, and everything that it's in our environment, we are going to acquire, and the importance of us as practitioners, how we're going to help to for that foundation. And the other thing I wanted to say, we are on the arena at the moment. The government is talking about early years. We are at the topic, so I think it's a fantastic opportunity for us to remind that yes, we're happy for the funding to go through. Yes, we're happy for baby rooms to be, you know, to provide the opportunity for the economic of the country, but also how are we going to make sure that we have the necessary resources and the information. The resources, I mean the person, the educator. And to finish, I would like to talk about the Shrek approach, which is what the Education Endowment Foundation talks about. They developed this approach, which is very simple, and it's just 5 steps about share, respond, expand, and conversation. And if we use this kind of basic, I wouldn't say basic because there's quite powerful, but if we have that vision that we need to get down and share with the children, and that develops with time, the child might not have the reaction that, I think the fact that babies are just observing and are absorbing gives the impression that they are not developing in time, and that whatever the educator is doing at the moment, or the brain architecture is doing at that moment, it's not having an impact. Yeah. So making sure that they understand that it takes time, we don't want to shower them with theory, but having that basis of, yes, it will have an impact in the future. That's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
It's really interesting, Lourdes, and I'm so happy that you brought up the funding as well, and how that funding is going to be used, because what I'm hearing, and certainly from a kind of the DFE perspective, is that funding for the babies is considered to be very generous. It's far more generous than for the older children on numerical terms. However, obviously the ratios are hugely different, but also I think what you're pointing out, which is really important, is that it's how that money is used as well. So, depending on who it is that you're hiring to work in the baby room, and how you're supporting them, and how you're training them, and how you're treating them, then that funding is used up very quickly.
That's super interesting. You said that. Unfortunately, what I have heard, I don't think that's going to be the case. I personally think that the higher, the better trained you are, you should be in the baby room, because that's what we need. Yeah, we need role models. We need mentors in the baby room, and when after we model that, then we can start, getting more reassured that this is going to become a culture, that we need someone, not an expert, but someone that has enough training, that has enough information about how the baby brains develop, and how about cognitive development. So unfortunately, that money is going to be shared across the whole nursery. And I don't think they're going to emphasize the importance of the baby room and the impact that that's going to have on those children in the long term, because it's everything. It's like early intervention in early.
I think, Lourdes, you've frozen a wee bit.
And it's going to predict how the child is going to develop in the future.
Oh, I don't know if that was my computer or Lourdes that froze, but Mona, is it okay if I move over to Jane now? Go
for it. Yeah, absolutely. Let's bring another voice in.
Thanks, Lourdes. That was again, you've taken it down that layer to really provoke us to think about, we need the strong practitioners in the baby room, and there's lots of discussion on the chat that's kind of opening up on that point. So over to you, Jane. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Mona. It's really, as Angela says, really thought-provoking and actually quite harrowing. I found those quotes particularly troubling. And, you kind of work on the assumption that those practitioners working with any child, but particularly babies, are their advocates. And then to see quotes like that, that's why I feel so troubled. But I think, I'm really interested to learn more about how you're approaching this from multiple sort of paradigmatic kind of angles. And I think this really taps it into the prevailing childism that exists, that kind of ageism and childism. And the younger the child gets, the less they're valued, and the less we feel we should take them seriously. And because we have worked on several projects together, writing projects, that I feel quite strongly that tapping into childing and a childlike way of being in the world can really open up ways for adults to relearn how to be in a more sensitive, sensorial way, affective way in the world that can perhaps undo some of the trauma that we see ourselves in terms of the Anthropocene and climate crisis and blah, 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 blah. So I think there's a really important not only practical or policy, but theoretical piece of work that needs to continue to go on, but needs to find expression in practice, which is about reappraising the child, how we conceive the child, and the child not only as agentic, but actually a font of knowledge and a font of knowing that we as adults are completely out of touch with. And as a result, you know, we're kind of constantly reinventing the wheel and having a very narrow instrumental view of the world, when in actual fact tapping into how children, particularly pre-verbal children, encounter the world. If you tune in, there's so much for us to learn and to be a different sort of human being in our relations in space and place and context. So I've kind of taken it off in a very unpractical philosophical direction, but I think given your project of bringing all these different strands together, seems to me that that is really, really fundamental as a starting place, and then can get to some of what Lourdes was saying and you were saying about, you know, practitioners realizing the enormity of the job that they do and the significance and the value of young children. So yeah, it's kind of.
I think that's amazing, Jane, and really important to hold on to. And what I find is that invitation to see the baby differently and to experience with them, educators in the baby room generally are really keen, not all, but generally are really keen to kind of take that invitation and explore it. There is a disconnect though between that invitation and then just to take it back to the practice. But you know, I drop off Nina, my 1-year-old, every morning in a baby room, and I'm always astounded at what is happening in that baby room when I drop Nina off, because at the moment they're settling, in my view, too many babies all at the same time, which means that the babies are crying. They are really upset because they've all just been dropped off. And so you have, and they're at max with their ratios. It is 1 to 3. So, you know, and I will count them up and they're always just within, but just within. And what you will have are one practitioner on the floor with a baby on each knee, and not even that is enough, because the baby that they have as their third baby is on the floor next to them crying because that baby wants to be held. And other mornings it's calmer because the babies aren't the ones that are settling, and you know, so it's not always horrendous, and I wouldn't leave Nina there if I thought she was kind of unsafe. But there is in that circumstance, there are so many educators who are just kind of holding on. They're holding on for dear life, and they're trying to get through, and they're feeling really kind of, just physically exhausted, emotionally exhausted. They're not, and I'm sure Dilys can kind of come in on this, but they're not necessarily then getting any sort of supervision, any way in which to like process that emotional labor, that physical labor. So they would love to kind of put the babies down for a moment and have a chance to kind of rethink how they think about care and bring in kind of more reciprocity. And actually I'm kind of misrepresenting, I'm really aware of this because I chose the quotes that I thought would be provocative. But in doing that, I have loads of quotes from people that they love self-determination, and that's the thing that gets them so excited about the babies, is when they go to the self-care station for themselves and they're constantly looking for creative ways for the babies to be more themselves and definitely see them as fully human. But I chose those quotes to be provocative, but also because in the current realities of the baby room, it feels like there's so little space to do anything other than survive on that really basic level of like, meet the need, meet the need, meet the need, meet the need. So yeah, sorry, that's a bit depressing, but But I think there's got to be, you know, what is the thing that we can say that gets us closer to that wonderful future where we can actually explore these things more openly?
No, I think if I can just come back very briefly, because I know
Yeah.
there are other people probably desperate to join in the conversation, but I think, you know, thinking in terms of policy and practice, and then connecting it to these kind of philosophical pedagogical ambitions, if you like. The thing that you impress upon us, which we've known for such a long time and doesn't seem to alter, if anything, it seems to worsen, is the fact that early years provision is seen as a business, a profit-making business. And so ratios of 1 to 3, you know, that's what we should be protesting against. It doesn't make any practical sense for a woman, usually with 2 arms, to be caring for 3 babies, you know. So in that sense, you know, what would make those practitioners less exhausted, able to tune in, able to, you know, kind of appreciate the importance of what they're doing, is to kind of value what they're doing and recognize that it's impossible to do the work that they're expected to do on the salaries that they're pitifully paid. You know, it's the working terms conditions. We go back to that time and time again, and frankly, the exploitation of these women doing this work. And that, you know, that's the thing. So yes, policy, yes, practice, but also activism.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there isn't, you know, the unions are not active in that space, and these workers' rights need to be protected. So yeah, sorry, but just that's another important strand, I feel. You know, how can we expect early years teachers, practitioners to be advocates of young babies when who's advocating for them, and how are they advocating for themselves? And so it's this kind of, and it taps into those professionalism debates and all the many debates that have been circulating in early childhood for a long time, and they find expression again in this context.
Thank you. We're hotting up now. We're really moving in, and we've got a couple of hands up. So I think there was Dilys first, and then Zoe, and then Nikki. So I'm kind of trying to keep a picture of the hands. So move over to Dilys, then Zoe, then Nikki. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, really, as has been pointed out, there are so many issues relating to baby rooms, and it's hard to find one to stick to, because one thing that I think is really important, we're talking about baby rooms for birth to 2, but when you think of, you know, you might have a 3-month-old baby, you might have a 22-month-old baby in the same room. They have just staggeringly different needs, and different needs of adults, and different needs of interactions, etc., etc. So that was one thing I just wanted to throw out there. I think it's so important that, you know, that we can hold on to our beliefs, the paradigms that we view as important, and champion what a baby room experience could be for parents, could be for babies, could be for practitioners. I think that has to be very clear, that it's not just a disaster, but we have a real problem, because there are many baby rooms that are a disaster, and that their babies are not being cared for in a proper manner. The staff are not being cared for in a proper manner. There isn't a clear pedagogy for babies in those settings, and there's no support anywhere for them. Sorry, I'm going to have to go because there's a phone call.
Thank you, Dilys. Mona, did you want to respond to Dilys, or should I move over to Zoe?
Oh, I just love everything Dilys has to say about this, and I think it's really important to do both of those things, to hold on to this is what it could be, while accepting this is the nature of what we have. I think it really highlights that some baby rooms are amazing and some baby rooms are disasters, and we've got to think, like, what's the difference in those situations? And at the moment, too much of it, I think, is up to the manager, who's the manager of that setting. So, for example, they will make the decision to say to a parent, okay, yeah, we can settle your baby this week, even though they know that there are 2 other babies settling this week. That manager could also say, no, that's going to be too much, I'm afraid, for the baby room team at the moment. We would need to push it back a few weeks once this baby's, you know, these kinds of things come back to the manager. And so, yes, I think it's about kind of activism around ratios and unionization. I'm for all of those things. But maybe in the interim, is there some work we can do around managers' understanding of the baby room, potentially?
Absolutely, Mona. I think that kind of level of understanding and attunement are vital. And again, somebody mentioned it earlier about having the 360 perspective of how the stakeholders are seeing what a baby room is for, what's happening in it. There's a real disconnect between those kind of basic ideas about it. And there's the hierarchical point as well. So I won't hog up because I've got loads to say, but I'm going to move over to Zoe next, and then it's Nikki, then Lisa, and then Lourdes.
I don't know where to start. I'm very tempted to start with that last comment, actually, because speaking up for managers, I mean, I sit with one foot very much still in the baby room. I've been working in the early years sector for over 35 years, so I feel like a very old hand. And back in the day, we had that whole thing about under 2 shouldn't be in nursery, they should be at home with their parents. So when I set up my first nursery 35 years ago, I thought, no, we'll just take from 18 months up. And then my second daughter was born, and she had other ideas because she much preferred being in the nursery than being one-to-one with me. So we set up a baby room, which I thought was beautiful the way it was done. It was very small, just 6 babies, and it worked brilliantly. And we kept the same model going through smallish babies, small rooms. But going back to the manager point, actually quite often it isn't the manager's fault. If that manager is working for a corporate, I'm going to be slightly controversial here, but if they're working under those corporate KPIs where occupancy is the be all and end all, they are under pressure to take those babies, regardless of the fact that each baby needs its own settling in period. We would never settle more than 1 baby in at a time in our nurseries. I run 16 nurseries. We're a not-for-profit group. And my managers would say, no, I can't start that baby until this baby's settled in. And that the baby's needs would always come first. And I don't recognise the hierarchy issue either, because I don't think anybody looks down on the baby rooms in our, we have different names for the group, so they're not necessarily referred to as baby rooms, but some of us still end up calling them baby rooms now and again. And they definitely don't sit further down the hierarchy. Although having said that, when I was assessing on the early years professional status before they changed the name, I do remember that the one issue we had were practitioners who had not had experience in baby rooms. That was always the gap in their knowledge. And then also when we were assessing them, we almost always found that they were based in the preschool room. And we had this discussion very early on. Why are all the early years practitioners that are going for this professional status, why are none of them based in the baby room? And I think that's when the penny dropped for me, that you're right, there is that hierarchy among part of the sector. Now, I'm one of those who doesn't like the term educator for babies. I feel educating babies sounds like it's something you're doing to them. Yeah. I prefer practitioner because it's more general. I'm also very out of tune with, I know, a lot of people in the sector, because we prioritise care in our whole philosophy and pedagogy. We have a relational pedagogy, and we value care as a first and foremost. Education comes second, because if you get the care right, the education follows, particularly with babies, and it gives them that agency. If you're responding and it's that care and responsiveness that matters more than anything else. And we were even criticised in an Ofsted report once where they said I got the impression that it was more about care than education, and this was talking about the baby room, and I'm thinking, yeah, it was actually at that instance it was more about care than education, because if you don't get the emotional well-being right, you're wasting your time trying to do any educating. So I've forgotten what the point was I wanted to say, other than There's so much. This is a really useful, interesting discussion because babies do not get a fair crack of the whip, and I'm horrified at the idea that you can just convert a classroom, create a nursery class, and put babies in it. That just and actually, one of the things you said early on, Mona, about the home from home, I don't think that necessarily means you're trying to replicate a home from home as a second best. I know a lot of our nursery mums really enjoy bringing their children in because they recognise that actually being at home with their baby is not what they are best at day in, day out. Whereas our baby room practitioners are people who love being with the babies. And I do think baby rooms are a bit Marmite. Everybody has to get an experience across all the age range, but then you're either a baby room person or you're not. And you know, we always make sure that practitioners are working in the room with the age range that they feel most comfortable, because it doesn't work otherwise. It's, you know, there's just so much I could go on about. And the ratios, I don't think is the big issue in the baby room. If the nursery is managed to the extent that there is flexibility. So for example, I mean, that the idea that there'd be a crying baby and nobody able to respond to it horrifies me. I know if a baby was crying in our baby room and it didn't cease very quickly, somebody from one of the other rooms would be putting their head around the door saying, do you need an extra pair of hands? Yeah. Because there's that flexibility. You know, the managers are usually supernumerary. There's always somebody available that can give a baby a cuddle. Babies don't go crying. Anyway, I better shut up now. Let's move on. But
I love everything that you've said, Zoe. I'm not going to hog the floor, Angela, because I want other people to. But I just think so much of what you've said is so incredibly important, and I think it's such an important point about the corporations as well. Like, yeah, when I say the manager's decisions, of course, who is above that manager matters a hell of a lot, and whether that manager's actually acting agentively or whether they're having to fall within corporate guidelines is
one of the reasons I've made that point is I did my doctoral research and interviewed a lot of managers and practitioners across a variety of settings, and that was one of the things that came out, that there were some saying, I was under pressure. We were having to, even though we weren't fully staffed in the baby room, we were having to maximise the occupancy despite not being fully staffed, and that's a real issue in the current recruitment crisis. I mean, I've got 2 or 3 nurseries who can't take any more children because we don't have the staff, and we don't ever use agency. So because everybody's got to know the children, so we just don't, as a matter of principle, use agency staff. But I know from my doctoral research that there were nurseries where there was pressure on managers to take babies even when they didn't have the right provision for it.
Wow.
Wow, sorry, Mona, that was provocative. We need a whole nother week of difficult dialogues on this. And I'm just going to cheekily chap in before we go to Nikki. Self-determination was mentioned earlier, and all of you that know me know that's my thing, that I just love it. And the babies are telling us if there's enough staff in there enough. They're telling us if what's happening to them is enough through their self-determined reaction to the environment and the people they're with. So their voices are so strong, and they're dictating probably why Mona's looking into this. The babies have drawn you to them, Mona, their agency and their determination. So Nikki, over to you. I think your hand was up earlier.
I didn't actually have my hand up. I was just clapping the point about activism that Jane made, because you know, it's sort of fundamental that we get practitioners on board to, as you say, like advocate for themselves as well as for children. And I just think that's really important, because it's really hard to get staff enthused about much when they're very poorly paid and under-resourced. So, and I think that everything that everyone has said has really illustrated that. But I also just think, you know, I've really loved the discussion today, because I also really feel passionately about caring for babies. And I think a lot of that does start with the education that we give them, because the idea, one of the quotes that you said earlier, Mona, was, you know, somebody, you know, this kind of idea that babies don't really do anything, when actually they are in the most rapid period of development they will ever go through in their entire lives. You know, that is so important to get that across to young practitioners, to young students, that actually this is a really exciting period. They're changing so much every day. They're literally acquiring like multiple skills every day. And you know, they're just brilliant. And I think that just needs to be really impressed upon students, that and practitioners, particularly young, lower qualified practitioners, that actually this is a really exciting period and they're exciting to work with, and they can be really good fun to work with, and they're super responsive, and there's just so much brilliant research around babies, and I just want that to kind of be emphasized. So yeah, I just wanted to say that really. But
which is one of the things we could actually celebrate about the baby room. Babies getting that one-to-one care at home. Zoe, you mentioned it with your own daughter, of like, actually, it can be really lonely caring for a baby at home.
It can be.
And for the baby as well. The baby
Yeah.
can need more stimulation
Yeah.
or more than
Yeah.
maybe that carer at home is able to provide at that time.
Yeah.
And so the baby room is this community, and the best baby rooms feel like this kind of space where the babies are together and
Exactly.
inspired by one another. And I think
Yeah.
that's something we really need to celebrate about the baby.
I absolutely agree.
It
And
can
really
be
celebrate it, rather than, because a lot of the images that you've presented
Yes,
today
I
have
know.
been these fairly, depressing scenarios of all these different babies crying and not getting their needs met. But I think, as you rightly pointed out, and really Zoe intimated as well, that a lot of this does come down to leadership and about how we can, manage the resources that are available, and be aware that there needs to be flexibility around staffing in those spaces, because it can change from one minute to another, can't it? But yeah, it's such a tricky area, but I think it's really worthy of research, and I'm delighted that that you've got that opportunity to look into that, Mona. So yeah, anything we can do and to support that. Write a book, perhaps. Could we all do that?
Okay, so I think Mona's on that one already, Nikki, but over to Lisa. Mona's beat you to that one. Lisa, would you like to
Thanks,
come
Andy. Thanks, Mona. It's just, it's one of those topics that's so passionate, but it can spiral your anger out of control on it. So I need to keep that in check. I just wanted to share my experience. I took over a nursery that was in trouble. I was asked to go and help it out in East London, and one of the first things I wanted to do, they'd had an inadequate with enforcement, so it was in trouble. So the first thing I wanted to do is sort of speak to all the staff, interview all the staff, and each of the rooms, and it just came to my my attention that the staff were not in the rooms, where their skill set were, where their passion was, and that was just a no-brainer for me. And so again, it's you talk about managers, and you talk about, I mean, we said Janelle, Lynette have been saying in the chat about, it's usually quite often it's the lowest qualified staff, the youngest staff. There's a thing about staff that I'm not saying this is a necessary criteria that students have to have, but sometimes it's the youngest staff, the most unqualified staff, the staff that don't have children themselves, which is a factor. I know it's controversial, but it is a factor, that are in baby rooms, and it becomes very sedentary in a baby room, and it's hard work. I've worked in a baby room, and trying to tell people that you're exhausted because you've sat on the floor all day is quite hard to tell people, but it is. You literally end up crawling from one place to the other, because to get up, and I'm quite close to the ground, but I still found it difficult. So I just think leadership, as Nikki alluded to, and obviously Zoe did too, about making sure that staff are in the right skill set. I did that. I managed to do that and change all the staff around. Strong staff are always in the preschool room. I still think that comes down to the things I've raised before. School readiness. School readiness is easy to achieve in a preschool room. They think Ofsted are going to notice the good stuff in there. Yeah. So that's why they'll stick all their staff in the preschool room, because it's all about getting them ready for school, which is a bonkers, because it's about being ready for life, not school. So that's one thing. The other thing is I wanted to just mention, and something that you spoke about, is the the home from home. And obviously Lourdes with us as a childminder practitioner, and when I was inspecting, I seemed to take over lots of childminding, because it was something I could quite easily do on my tariff. So my respect for childminders went through the roof. And I did, it's interesting, some of the stuff that you provoked today made me think about, I did, even though I was really proud of the baby room that I achieved at the nursery, and within 6 months of the inadequate, we got a good, and my staff in the baby room were flying, and I was so proud of my baby room. So I worked really hard with the staff, and I was very proud. I still felt, when I was inspecting, which came after that job, that childminders if I was going to advocate for a friend someone I said to me, in my opinion, what would I still think I would push the childminder for under 2s.
Interesting.
But you've made me think about why.
Mhm.
And I can't say, but I'm thinking, is it ratio? Again, I know you're allowed 3 children as a childminder, but or is it the home? Is it the environment? But that's really interesting because you've made me think, why do I think that? So I'm questioning my own reasons why, because I love the community. I love the social aspect of the babies with other babies. And it is can be very isolating in a home with your own baby as well as someone else's baby. So thank you for that provocation for me. But yeah, just a few things I wanted to share.
Okay, Lisa. Mona, I'm going to just fire us over to Lourdes. She has put it
Yes.
on the chat, but Lourdes, if you can sum it up in 1 minute, and then we can give the final forum to Mona for her reflections and responses. And just to note, this is our final difficult dialogue session for the academic year. We do have a new one starting 2025 in October. My email's on the chat. Look forward to any of you sharing your practice, research, papers, or anything at all, or just to open up a dialogue. So over to you, Lourdes.
Thank you. I advocate for settling in period policies. I personally think they have to be personalized. You can't say the child has only 3 hours to get settled and the parent has to leave the child. The parent has to leave crying. The child stays crying. The parent doesn't have enough time to inform the practitioner of the likes, dislikes, interests of the child, how to deal if the child is uncomfortable. Yes, they do give all of the paperwork and the parents have to, sign all of the permissions and write what the child, but in one sentence, you cannot really get to provide the practitioner who that child is. So I think allowing a settling period that is tailored to the child's needs. Some children are going to need less time, some children are going to need more time. And when those settling periods are taken into consideration and are tailored to those individualities of each one of those children, because every child is unique, then the ethos, the philosophy, and the culture of the organization, and in this case of the settling, the setting, the earlier setting changes, and it becomes a calm atmosphere. It becomes a place where there's well-being for everybody. The practitioners are less charged because the less children that are crying. If they're better settled, the practitioner is going to the well-being of the practitioner is going to be higher. And to finish, I would like to say that hierarchies should vanish. There should be a mixture of different. Lisa just said, make sure that there is a representation of qualities and levels of expertise and instruction in every single one of those rooms. And if there could be a mix of all of these experiences, that's going to enrich the quality of the whole setting and the well-being of the children and overall. And to finish, I would like to say, when moms and Lynette just mentioned that mothers bring so much expertise into the room, but not only that, if the parents and the carer has the opportunity to stay there for more than only 3 hours, it can be whatever, 3 days or a week or whatever it needs to be, they have the opportunity to advocate for what the earliest practitioners are doing in the setting and how their children are developing effectively.
Yes, that's such a good point. Okay, right. I mean, all I'm going to say is a massive thank you. Thank you, everybody, for sharing your time, your energy, your thoughts, your ideas. And just to say, this really is an ongoing conversation. So everything I offered up are questions in my head. It feels like there are lots of questions in yours. And I just hope that we can carry this on as a dialogue going forward. I've put my email into the chat for anybody that doesn't have it, and open door policy on that term. If you want to chat more about the baby room, I will always have that chat. So please do, any ideas for projects or things that we can be picking up on, please do just get in touch. And thank you so much for having me, Angela.
Mona, always a pleasure, and everybody that joined us today is so exciting because we're creating and being provocative. And Mona, your research and your insights and intuition into voicing what's going on for babies is just so timely, so needed. And I think I'll be looking forward to inviting you back in October for the next difficult dialogues, if that's okay.
Love to.
So, Mona, thank you so much. Thank you everybody for today.
Thank you all.